Okay, boxing fanatics, welcome to episode 63 of the podcast. I'm delighted to be joined once again by Mr. Oscar Pick. So, Teofimo Lopez defeats Romero via majority decision to capture the WBA welterweight title and become a free weight world champion. Oscar, what's your initial reaction to Lopez's win last night?
Yeah, I thought it was a fair result. Obviously I saw Romero's reaction to it, and he weren't best pleased. He felt like he should have won. He felt like not a lot of shots were being landed, but I think we can all see that Lopez. He was a busier fighter. He was more active. I think he was causing Romero a lot of problems with his speed. And obviously, Romero had that really key moment in round five where he really shook Lopez. But obviously, he wasn't able to get him out of there. And I think Lopez did quite well to recover from that, fairly quickly. He kind of used his experience to kind of weather that storm. And from that moment onwards, I think Lopez kind of kept Romero in a bit of a box. Like Romero's never going to be this high volume guy, but I don't know why how he can expect to win a fight when he's just throwing such little amounts of shots. Um, don't get me wrong, I actually felt like Romero did really turn up, and I felt like he had his moments, and he did actually impress me at times. But I don't think he's got a case, to say that he won that fight because he just simply wasn't doing enough for me, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sergio Mora said something on the commentary, and he said he described it as an intense sparring session. And to be honest, so at times throughout that fight, that is what it kind of looked like, in my opinion. It was just a little bit, there was a bit of a lack of action there. To be honest, there was a bit of a lack of action. Like you said, Romero was very low volume. I think frustratingly low volume, if I'm being honest, because when he did let his hands go, he looked dangerous, Romero. When he lets, there's definitely power there. There's definitely explosiveness. And as we saw in the fifth round, like you said, he did hurt him. He did hurt Lopez. He hurt him quite badly. Lopez did well to stay on his feet, not get knocked down. If there was more time in the round, that would have been very interesting. But it was just few and far between. Too many rounds where, yeah, Romero's just not throwing much at all, just kind of allowing Lopez to come forwards, hoping and praying for like a check left hook to land and, for him to kind of basically looking for like a one punch knockout almost sometimes. So, yeah, I'm kind of frustrated a bit because I'm thinking, you know what, Romero, you're showing you're a good fighter, but, you didn't do enough. I just don't know how he can be in the post press conference saying that, he was robbed or whatever like that. I just feel like you can't win a fight like that. You can't just throw that little punches. If you're going to be that low volume, you need to hurt every single time you throw, and he didn't. So yeah, it's interesting. It was an interesting fight. There were good moments. There were moments where it was a little bit, yeah, lacked action. But overall, Teofimo Lopez, showed his class in the end, and look, freeweight world champion. That doesn't sound too bad, does it? Let's be honest. So the judges' scorecards, one judge actually did have it 114, the draw, which I thought was uh bizarre to be honest. And then the other judge, I think it was 115, 112, and 116. Sorry, 116, 112, 115, 113. What did you make of the scorecards? Were these a bit too close for your liking or spot on? How do you kind of see them?
I felt like 160, 112 was probably about right, to be fair. If I'm being honest, I didn't actually score it round by round, but it kind of did feel like an 8-4 type of fight. And yeah, I can't see 114, 114. Like that is borderline ludicrous, really. But yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you in terms of it being a bit frustrating on Romero's part because obviously it's easier said than done against a sharp counter puncher like Lopez. Even though he won't admit it, I think um, Romero was very wary about getting countered by Lopez, and I mean he was doing well to evade a lot of the counters coming. But I actually thought defensively it was quite a good performance. Like when he said he didn't get hit clean with too many shots, like he's telling the truth. Like he didn't get caught with anything big. But yeah, it was just the lack of output really that kind of cost him in that fight. Like, watching it in full, you saw moments where he genuinely could have, he did have a chance to win if only he'd thrown a few more punches basically and hurt him a couple more times maybe. And that was genuinely possible because he did hurt him in that fifth round. And like you say, Lopez Romero does clearly possess quite a bit of power. I actually think there's a lot to work with Romero. Like obviously he's with Ishmael Salas now, and I think his lack of technical qualities was always his downfall.
Mhm.
But now he looks a more, defensively responsible fighter. He just needs to, be confident enough to throw a few more shots. I don't know whether he's, thinking about his gas tank, how he's going to hold up in the later rounds and so on, or whether he was simply just waiting for that perfect punch to land. But obviously, you can't do that in a 12-round fight. Like that's, Lopez is experienced enough to get hurt, recover, and get back to his boxing and stay disciplined. And obviously, Romero couldn't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I just found the demeanor of Rolly just quite strange, to be honest. He is a bit of a quirky character. But I don't know, in the corner, like, Ishmael Salas was giving him instructions and he just kind of looked kind of quite spaced out at times and stuff. And he's definitely very, very eccentric character. But yeah, like you said, I agree. I think there is talent there. There's definitely talent. There's definitely something to work with there. When you see that, last night, when you see what he did last night, maybe it's not a surprise that he was able to beat Garcia and stuff. He has got some weapons there. And I think even Tio was kind of wary of that as well. But yeah, he just needed to do a bit more. He just needed to do a bit more. And who knows, if he stays very small Salas, he can bounce back potentially. Um, but yeah, this low volume stuff, he needs to do more. He needs to do more for sure. Um, I guess the initial straight off the fight, Rolly was calling for a rematch. What do you think about that? I mean, personally, I don't think I want to see a rematch. I just feel like it wasn't like a good enough fight, in my opinion, to warrant that straight away. I wouldn't mind down the line. I'm hoping these two guys are going to be two guys who are going to be in the welterweight division for, maybe years to come still, because they're both, fairly young and I think they're both good additions. But yeah, what do you make of a potential rematch? Would you like to see it again?
No, I don't think he did enough to justify a rematch, really. Like, like I say, I want to give him some credit because I genuinely feel like it was a solid performance. He just wasn't doing enough. Um, but yeah, like I say, you can't put in a performance like that, throw that amount of shots and expect to have a rematch. I think everyone can agree. Well, most people can agree that Lopez won that fairly convincingly.
Mhm.
And when there's a convincing winner, and it wasn't a particularly exciting fight, besides a few moments of jeopardy. Uh, I don't think it's got the ingredients for a rematch. I don't think any fan is going to be clamoring for a rematch, so that would seem quite pointless to me. I mean, Lopez, you know, he's obviously he's in an interesting position because straight after the fight he said, he's not interested in title defenses. He just wants unifications. He wants Devin Haney or the winner of Garcia Ben. But then obviously you got Jack Catchall, who's technically his mandatory challenger, but it's just a case of whether the WBA is actually going to enforce that or let Lopez basically do what he wants with the title, which I'm kind of assuming that that's going to be the case where Lopez is able to kind of hold that title hostage to a certain extent. Where he's either involved in these massive fights or he just doesn't have to fight his mandatories. And obviously, I'd like to see Jack Catchall get his shot at the title, but I don't think the WBA, based on their track record, is going to be too anxious to put him in that position.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, personally, I wouldn't mind the Jack Carroll fight. I think that's another good fight. I think I think even the unifications are good options as well. So I wouldn't be too disgruntled if he does, if he is able to pick and choose a little bit. I guess if we're trying to be fair, I mean, the whole WBA situation is a bit of a joke, to be honest. I mean, why do you need to have a regular title and a super title? You're making boxing, even more, complicated than it needs to be, So that, but I guess you could say, in another weight division, Jack Carroll would be the interim champion or whatever, or mandatory. I guess it's the same thing overall. Personally, I would like to. I wouldn't be disgruntled at all about the Catterall fight. But unification against Haney or the winner of Garcia Lopez definitely would be, yeah, would be good. Would be good as well. So I guess it remains to be seen. Remember, I guess Lopez has an exclusive deal with the zone now as well, doesn't he? So he's going to have that kind of political backing where the broadcast going to be on his side, and then the sanction body, like you said, they're probably going to let him do what he wants to do. So that is interesting. Before the fight, we obviously, it was quite a bit of a big topic about Lopez moving to 147. What do you think about him at the weight? I thought at the weigh-in, he looked good. He came in at 147. He wasn't like way below. He came in just at the weight. I thought he looked healthy. I thought he actually looked quite big for the weight. He's 5'9", so he's not a short guy. Um, what was your opinion? How do you think he made the weight, Lopez, yesterday?
Yeah, he looked really good. I think obviously, it shows the fact that he was kind of just as energetic in the last round as he was in the first round, basically. Like in that sense, I think he clearly suits the weight. And obviously, we were talking about whether his power is going to have much of an effect at this weight. And even though he obviously didn't land anything huge to really trouble Romero, but like I said at the beginning, I do feel like he kept Romero in a bit of a box where Romero was clearly not eager to march into range and kind of bully him. Like he was very aware of getting countered, and I think obviously the speed was a bit of a factor as well. The fact that Lopez was kind of catch countering him, fairly often, even though I felt like Romero was quite defensively tidy. But yeah, I think it's a difficult one to say because it wasn't what you describe as a vintage Lopez performance. Like we've seen him in the past against Lomachenko, Josh Taylor, even Arnold Barboza. Like I don't feel like that kind of Lopez turned up really.
Mhm.
But then you have to bear in mind, obviously, he's coming off a loss.
Mm.
Um, and also, I think Romero presents that kind of tricky style where maybe he wasn't willing to take, as many risks as he normally would. So I think all in all, it was a solid performance, and I'm interested to see what's next for him at the weight.
Yeah, absolutely. And that says a lot, that the fact that Romero, didn't come forward and kind of start swinging and, wasn't as aggressive. I think that does speak to maybe, Tio's ability as well. And maybe punches harder than, his record kind of suggests in recent times. I think I was listening to commentary and they said two stoppages in his last 10 fights, which is surreal because I think, like we said many times, like Tio, when he was at 135, his power was one of his strong points. It was something that we really associate with Tio. He's a big puncher and stuff, and he can knock you out. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like the power's just kind of evaporated at 140 and 147. I just don't think he's a big puncher anymore, to be honest, from what I'm seeing. I mean, I think he's an accurate puncher. I just don't think the concussive power is there from what I can see. Remember, and look, he didn't land on Rolly that clean. We've seen Rolly obviously get knocked out by Gervonta Davis all those years ago. Um, but Tio's more of an accurate puncher. But yeah, like I said, I agree. I think he looked good. I think he looks big enough for the weight for sure. Another talking point was the fact that these guys are friends, and to be honest, they almost fought like friends, in my opinion. I don't know. I just felt like maybe there was a little bit of a lack of animosity. I mean, look, Rolly went for him in the fifth round, fair enough. He went for the stoppage, but the rest of the fight, I don't know. You could make a case. I don't know. It's hard to say they were holding back, but you know, it did lack a bit of like animosity at times, I thought. What do you think about them being friends? I saw the post-fight interview, Rolly again saying he loves Tio and stuff. Do you reckon the fact that they're friends that kind of played into the fight and kind of made it maybe less entertaining than it could have been? Than maybe if there was genuine, I don't know, hate for each other or dislike or just, no feelings.
I don't know really. I think it was almost a case of like from what I could tell, I think it was a case of Teofimo Lopez maybe just wanting to win a little bit more than Romero. Like, although Romero will come out and say, "Oh, we was robbed," like I think I saw him say as well when other fighters put in that type of low volume, almost high quality performance, they get praised for it, whereas he's obviously coming off a defeat now. But then I don't know, like I don't feel like I don't feel like there was, a lot of great action. But then Romero did catch him quite clean a few times. Like obviously we said the fifth round. But I remember before that, did you see him land that like check left hook that kind of
Mm.
stumbled
Yeah.
Lopez a little bit? Where I feel like, when he's being so as patient as he was, you're always giving yourself the best possible chance to like land those big shots, I think. But you do also have to give him credit for that. He just wasn't able to capitalize on those moments. Whether that's a case of him being friends with him, I'm not too sure. But obviously, he he would kind of, get a bit of a reaction from Lopez, but wouldn't kind of follow it up with shots. And I also don't feel like stylistically he's that type of fighter. Like other fighters, I feel like, for example, when he landed that check left hook,
Mhm.
other fighters would then, step back into range and maybe try and let off a flurry or something. But obviously, Romero was just kind of land one punch, have a look, kind of step back, and it was all very kind of like rinse and repeat in that sense. Like there wasn't too much variety in what he was doing. Like I don't think I saw him throw, any combination really, in other than the time when he, let his hands go in the fifth round. So yeah, I don't know if the friendship kind of played much of a factor, but I think, yeah, stylistically, it was kind of always likely to be that kind of fight where it's a little bit cagey at times, and obviously Lopez, Romero kind of sitting back and waiting for the perfect shot.
Yeah, true. I guess that is his style. He is a bit of a thinker, I suppose. Rolly, and like we said, yeah, he's very low volume. Um, I don't know. It's an interesting one. I mean, I guess boxing is boxing. I'm not saying both guys obviously both wanted to win. I'm just, there were moments where it did give me sparring session vibes a little bit. But then again, Lopez was busted up quite badly in the fifth round. That cut, they did well to control that cut, to be fair. That could have been a big hindrance to him going forwards if that eye started to, keep bleeding. But yeah, they done brilliantly to close it basically. One man, Oscar, who we spoke about in the preview was Teofimo Lopez's dad, Teofimo Lopez Senior, and he arguably had a good night last night, actually providing somewhat technical advice in the corner, even as something as simple as keep your right hand up, to stop the check left hook from Rolly Romero, and I don't know. I think with Tio Senior, I think maybe his advice in the corner, it sounds basic, but maybe it's because he knows his son, and maybe he doesn't need to be too technical with what he says. It's possible. But what did you make of the corner work of Teofimo Lopez Senior? Was it an improvement? Was it better than usual?
Well, from what I could tell, he hardly disgraced himself in the corner, but we've seen in enough fights where it's been a lot worse than it was that night. And I don't know if they've actually gone away and kind of rectified certain mistakes that he was making. If they have, then fair play because not all fighters do that. Some camps, or I guess training camps in general, might have this arrogance of like, oh, we want a world title doing it this way, so we can carry on doing that way. That's not how it works. If Teofimo Lopez wants to, carry on getting the best out of himself, then he
Mhm.
needs to be willing to make certain changes at least. And even if he's not willing to, find a new trainer,
Mhm.
then they need to be making changes in the gym. They need to be, finding different ways in terms of how to approach a fight. And maybe they have gone away and had to think about that. And maybe, Lopez Senior sort of looked himself in the mirror and thought, I could be a better trainer. I could I need to kind of be a better guy in the corner, which he was. But I do still have that feeling where, I do wonder how much better Lopez could be with a better trainer. Because to be honest, like, even though there was no cock ups against Romero, I still don't feel like, I feel like there could have been moments where Lopez even could have been making certain improvements or adjustments in there. Like I said, he was kind of catch countering, but I think he could have done that more successfully than what he was doing. And if you had, a high level coach in the corner there, they could be pointing him in the right direction, saying like, watch out for that shot and like try and catch counter here or whatever. So there's little things like that where I think you would benefit from a more experienced and high level coach, but it looks like he's going to stay with his dad, which is, fair enough. So if his dad can kind of improve as a coach, then hopefully Teofimo Lopez can, improve a bit as a fighter as well.
Well, it's interesting because end of the day, look, you know, the proof is in the pudding, and Teofimo Lopez, whatever we say about his father, he's guided him to free weight world champion. That's the reality, I guess. Like you said, the point, I guess, the key point, I suppose, is that could he be even better? Could he have had a better performance against Shakur Stevenson if he had someone a bit more savvy in the corner? I guess that is the question. maybe it is that case. Maybe against someone like Rowley, maybe Tia doesn't need anyone too complex in a corner to tell him what to do. He doesn't have any specific ideas, I suppose, some really nuanced ideas. But maybe at the upper level, who knows? It's very hearsay. It's hard to know. End of the day, he's a free weight world champion. His father's always been with him. They seem to have a good relationship. So, like, who are we to say that it's not working? But I think there was another guy in the corner yesterday. I forgot his name. Commentary said it. They said it
It's
was,
Milton McCrory, isn't it?
yeah, I think so.
But
So,
he's been with Lopez since he was an amateur, basically. So everyone kind of said that he's like the level head in the corner, whereas his dad is a bit kind of erratic, and you never quite know what you're going to get with him.
mm,
But yeah, obviously that camp hasn't really changed much over the years. Like they've kept the same people, but you just hope that they are kind of making changes in the gym, which I'm sure they are. But but yeah.
yeah, I suppose that's not a bad balancer in a corner. I suppose if it's like two extremes, isn't it? You got one who's very simple, just basically saying, "Oh, just beat the other guy up," and the other guy's a bit more, a bit more calculated. I suppose that's not a bad combination. It certainly worked last night. Um, it'll be interesting to see if Lopez does explore other options. I don't know. It's quite late now. It's not late, but I mean, he did try the Reynoso thing. It didn't quite work out there. I don't know if it'd have to be like quite a special partnership for someone to deal with his dad as well. If we're being honest, to be able to have him in the corner, have his input as well. I'm just not sure I see it at the moment. Um, we spoke about this in the preview, Oscar, but where does, based on that victory, what does that do for Lopez's, I guess, his legacy, his potential Hall of Fame status? Like I've said a million times, freeway world champion. Obviously, had big. I wrote a Substack newsletter earlier on this week, and he's obviously had a massive win against Lomachenko. He's got that on his resume. He's got the Josh Taylor win on his resume. He's got the win against Arnold Barboza. In New York. Obviously, that was a very niche event. Um, but in your mind, if he hangs up his gloves now, like where? I mean, firstly, I guess where is he in the pound for pound list? Do you put him near the pound for pound list at the moment, Tio, or is he far away?
Well, before the Stevenson fight, I had him sort of there or thereabouts, like maybe around kind of 10th on the pound for pound list. And then obviously you had to take him out based on the Stevenson fight. But now that he's beaten Romero, I think it's a good solid win. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think we can get too carried away and make out Romero is an elite level fighter because I feel like it would be a stretch to call
Mhm.
Romero elite. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I think it was a solid performance, but I wouldn't put Romero in that category. And I think, even though it was a good win for a world title, I don't know if it quite gets Lopez in the top 10 of the pound for pound list. But obviously you can kind of have him on the fringes, maybe in the top 15, for example. I think he's kind of there at that point. And I don't know, I'm more interested in seeing how Lopez is in his next fight because I think Romero is an interesting style. Like I said, it wasn't necessarily a vintage Lopez performance, but I'm just interested to see at this new weight whether he can kind of rediscover some of that brilliance he found against Josh Taylor and Lomachenko, whether he can produce that in another fight against a different style of opponent. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of like Hall of Fame status, I think that's an interesting discussion because there's still fighters out there who haven't been inducted in the Hall of Fame. Like I was looking the other day. I don't think there's any kind of like major ones, but there's the likes of Chris Eubank. Yeah, Chris Eubank, for example, who's not actually in the
Senior,
Hall of Fame. Yeah,
senior,
yeah, senior, yeah. So
really?
Nigel Benn only got inducted this year. And this year was Nigel Benn, Golovkin, and Antonio Tava. So those guys had to wait up until now to actually get inducted in the Hall of Fame, and that does kind of give you an idea as to how competitive it can be. But I think it also depends on the year because I know like one year, for example, Sean Porter got nominated, and obviously Sean Porter was a really good fighter, but I wouldn't say he's quite Hall of Fame. But yeah, I think Lopez could potentially get there at some point. But then, there's a lot of fighters who are active now who could retire and will definitely become Hall of Fame, like your O6, like your Inues,
Yeah, yeah, of
etc.
course. Mhm. I guess the bar's higher than I thought then, to be honest. I think the names you reeled off, I think I think definitely Golovkin. I'm shocked it took that long to nominate the Golovkin. I think Golovkin for me would be, would be straight in there. But I guess that shows yeah, it's more competitive than I thought. I mean, freeweight world champion, it's hard. I think it's difficult not to give it to him eventually. Freeweight world champion, it's it's a special achievement. But I guess we'll see. Time will tell. I mean, look, he's still going. He's still going. If he can become undisputed at welterweight, then there'd be no question there. Then he'd definitely go in. But
Yeah.
I guess we'll see what happens. Finally, then, we've talked about the welterweight division based on last night. How do you see him doing against some of the other guys? The stuff like Jack Carroll, fights like Jack Carroll, Devin Haney, Liam Paro, Garcia, Ben. Where'd you put him amongst them based on last night's performance? Tier that is.
Yeah, I think he beats Liam Parrow, because Liam Parrow is quite a slick fighter. He's also, tough. He's shown that in his last two performances. But I think the speed of Lopez and the athleticism, to be fair, would probably cause Parrow a lot of problems. And I think Jack Catchell's got the style to cause Lopez absolute fits, given that he's sort of tricky southpaw. And I think Jack Catchell's kind of looking better than ever. Like, arguably his last performance was one of his best. So I think that's actually a really interesting fight that I'd like to see. But it could be one, it could be another of these Lopez fights where he just kind of squeaks past, and maybe it's a little bit controversial on the scorecards. But yeah, if I'm being completely honest, I can't see him beating Devin Haney based on what I saw that night. And I always felt like that was an interesting matchup, him and Haney, because I felt like, obviously Lopez being really athletic and stuff, and Haney being very technical. I thought it felt like it was almost a bit like the kind of James Toney, Roy Jones Jr. type style of matchup. But I don't feel like Lopez is actually that guy anymore, where he can use his athleticism to such an extent. Like, he just doesn't seem quite as explosive. And like I say, I don't know whether that was because of the style of Romero, or whether
Mm.
that's just because this is a fighter he is now. But I just didn't necessarily see enough to be for him to beat someone like Haney, who I think yeah I think he's kind of the man in that division. I think he could beat everyone, to be fair.
Yeah, I think it's hard to disagree. I think Haney does seem like the guy at the moment. Lopez almost become just more of a boxer, really. He was more maybe like a box puncher before, and now he's more boxer. So which is why I would, like yourself, I'd back him as Paro. That'd be a very boxing fight, and I think Lopez probably a better boxer. The Garcia fight, I could see him unboxing out Garcia, to be honest. I
Yeah,
know, I know it's chess, not checkers, but we saw Garcia lose to Rowley. Conor Ben, let's see what he does against Garcia, but you'd have to back Tio there as well. Hey, like I agree. Jack Carroll's at least stylistically is a bit different. He's got like a nice left hand and stuff, and he's quite accurate himself. So that would be an interesting fight. But yeah, I mean, Devin Haney seems like the guy at the moment, to be honest. But let's see. Hopefully that fight happens in the future. All right, guys, well, there you have it. Thanks a lot to Oscar for joining me as always. And if you like this episode, please like, comment, subscribe. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.